Brandon and I are excited to talk a little bit about how Brandon has utilized Smartling over at Butterfly Networks. It's just going to be a great conversation, Brandon. I'm looking forward to it.
I am as well. We'll have fun.
Awesome. Well, great. Feel free, guys, throughout the entire webinar to ask questions in the chat. You can also use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we're going to answer them as we go. Let's dive in. Brandon.
Perfect. It looks like we also have a hand raised. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if you want to take that before we dive in, but
I saw that. Maybe
easiest.
Let us know what your thoughts are in text, and we'll definitely answer your question. It's a cool feature. I actually haven't seen that activated in a while. But Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the slides.
Sure. So I work at a company called Butterfly Network. We are a handheld ultrasound maker. Have the device somewhere here. Actually have it right here. Device plugs into your Android device, your Apple device, and allows you to have a window into the human body. Been at Butterfly about 2 years. Done a little bit of everything. Started off leading our cloud team from a product perspective. Moved on to our international expansion. Did a whole bunch of work there, and now I'm really laser focused on moving into the enterprise segment. So touched on many parts of the company. Probably one of the longest people at the company at this point. So that's really fun seeing how it's grown, and just really enjoy being able to work with really smart people and have really smart partners like you guys.
I think what's so cool is that your product is just so forward thinking. And when you and I last spoke, we spoke on the Loke Show. You were my first guest on the Loke Show. Thank you. We talked about how your product is substantially less expensive than other products that do similar things. They can't do the same thing because they're much bigger, but can you talk us through a little bit of like the innovation that you've brought to the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So a traditional ultrasound typically consists of 3 what we call transducers, or really probe heads. They often are also in a cart format or a large laptop format, and they typically range between $50,000 and $200,000. These tools also use something called piezoelectric crystals, and these are crystals that are actually grown in a laboratory. And when an electric current is passed over them, they resonate, and that's what generates the sound waves that generate ultrasound. We use the same type of technology in regards to generating sound waves. However, we do it a little bit different. We use something called a semiconductor chip. Most of you have heard of that, I'm sure, but it's the same technology that your digital camera uses, your personal computer uses, which allows us to do a couple of things. It allows us to do it at scale, and it allows us to do it quicker. It allows us to do it more cheaply or cheaper. So under the head of this probe here is a semiconductor chip, which actually has silicone drums on it that vibrate. And when the electric current is passed over those, that actually generates the sound waves. So a completely novel technology that's really turned things on its head for the point of care ultrasound space.
And it's cool because it just plugs into your smartphone and you can see the image on the phone.
Plugs in. Yep, here you go. I happen to have a lightning probe in my hand for my iPhone. Download the app, log in, and you're ready to go. 2 minutes.
That's so cool because it makes field medicine more accessible and
Absolutely.
at a substantially lower cost. I think that's just such a cool innovation. But the question then becomes how do you bring this to markets around the world? So I'm going to share my slides and maybe we can start by talking about like what was the problem that you all were trying to solve about a year and a half ago when you started to think like, all right, let's put this product on the map.
Absolutely. So, as a little bit of context, we launched commercially about 2 years ago, actually, October 2018, just in the US. We know it's a very, very developed market. We know that it's pretty forward thinking in terms of education and getting people out there using point of care ultrasound. But we knew that if we wanted to achieve our mission, which is democratize medical imaging, that meant going much more broadly than that. It meant going to the rest of the world, and even more specifically, countries that didn't have access to this type of imaging. So we started a huge project. I was leading that effort at the time, and the project was really bring Butterfly internationally. And I think last time we spoke, Adrian, we talked a lot about, what it meant for Butterfly to be international. Uh, all the various work streams we had, from regulatory through logistics of how do you actually deliver these devices around the world. And I guess the recurring thread that we talked about was translation spans the entire segment of it. Everything from our marketing content to our user manuals to our apps, our knowledge base, all which were their own work streams, all had to be translated, all had to represent the various languages of the countries that we were going to be serving. And we needed a way to do it at scale for a reasonable cost, etc.
Yeah. And when you started to get into this process of scaling your business into different markets, and we'll talk about how many markets and things like that soon, what were some of the challenges that you ran up against when you started to work with a provider in the space?
Yeah, so I'll be very honest. Smartling was the second provider. We had originally started with we had a couple of recommendations internally, and they were a big name in the industry, and we found a couple of issues. We originally started with just looking at some of our paper content. We started specifically with our user manuals. Things like the language pre-flight, so getting our glossaries set up, making sure that our styles were handled properly. Simple communication didn't go well. And I would say the part that was most upsetting for me was when we got those translations back. We went and actually did some validation. We sent these out to local speakers, native speakers in the countries we were getting ready to ship in, and they were unhappy with the translations. They said, this doesn't make sense. And it was right around that point that we were starting to think about actually translating our app, our website, all of our content essentially. And we said, we have to do something here. We spoke with our engineering team, and a couple of them had actually worked with Smartling before. I should also mention, we were starting to get under a time crunch. This was probably late last August. We had a go live scheduled of October 1st. And that meant we had about 5 or 6 weeks or so to get everything ready to go. I should also mention, because we are a medical device company, that really means that there's regulations that have to be met in terms of what's translated and what's not. It is not just a brand thing that we were adhering to. So at that point, Smartling swooped in. I think I told this story last time, but it was a Friday afternoon in August. The team said, we'll have this information to you by the end of the day. It was in my email. The teams worked back and forth over the weekend to get the contract signed, and we started on Monday. It was really, really quick. And, they were, I say this a lot, but Smartling was running with us, running as fast as we were and running alongside us and handing us everything we needed as we went.
We love to work with teams that love to move quickly. So we were particularly excited when you gave us an opportunity, and let's dive into what we did and what you were able to achieve. Tell us again about the different content that Butterfly has to make this product experience a success around the world.
Yeah, when you list it out sort of in this format, it's a lot. So we've done a little bit of everything, and I think the sales team at Smartling is disappointed in me. I don't think there's anything else that they can sell us at this point. So I'll sort of start really basic, and maybe we can build up the ladder. I'm not going to go in the order of this slide, but really starting at our apps. So from a technology perspective, making sure that our desktop app as well as our mobile app are translated and done so in an automated way. From there, continuing down the software perspective, release notes. We've also then done our user manual. So we do it every couple of months. How do you actually use the product? And that one is a big regulatory thing. We've done our contracts. We've done our marketing emails. We've even subtitled videos, and we also have an integration for our knowledge base. So we translate everything. Our goal is really to not just look like an American company who happens to be selling in these other countries as an afterthought. It's really, one of our mandates is to go deeply into all of these countries.
What I'm so interested in here is that you're not just translating a marketing website or a product that is ordinary or something that people would be accustomed to working on. This is very specific content that you're working with. You already showed us the device. You talked a little bit about the medical benefits and objective that the device will help users to achieve. But there's a lot of very specific content type that is embedded within each of these different applications.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. So I was going to say, absolutely. We are a medical device company. And again, I already mentioned this, but it wasn't just for our brand that we're making sure that our marketing site looks good. It is actual critical safety content about how the device works and should be used effectively. And, probably the biggest question that we asked when we came barreling through the door at Smartling was, how can we make sure that this medical content is handled properly? And that is really, I would call it a multi-step process that we use with Smartling. Everything starting with the team of people working on our account, the linguists working on our account are medical translators. We use a workflow that is a multi-step workflow so that it's actually, one person doesn't have full say on what that translation looks like and there are corrections made. And then any other content, whether it's legal content or regulatory content, we actually work with the language services team to make sure that the translators assigned to that work are the appropriate people.
When you started working with Smartling a little over a year ago, how did you kick off these conversations with us? What was that like?
Yeah, so you guys actually drove. We came through the door with a lot of requests and a lot of, I'll call them showstoppers, meaning, our quality and regulatory team was very, very concerned about how do we ensure that these translations are up to snuff. Valerie, who I believe leads the language services team today, got on the phone with us and walked us through step by step the different workflows that we could use, the different types of translators that exist, and even gave us examples of the type of work that they've done. Me knowing at that point very little about localization brought our native speaking French marketer with us, who was very, very passionate. She came from another med device company, who was very passionate about making sure that these translations were high quality. They also had a long conversation about making sure that we were assigned the right people. Valerie also walked us through language pre-flight, context, style guides, examples, and very quickly we brought all of that to the team. And as if we wanted to do even more work, we then went and actually had our app validated by a third party in terms of translations, who also came back and could not find a single issue with it. So at that point, the vetting was complete and we were ready to run.
Nice. Well, run you did. Past 12 months, you translated over 1 million words.
Oof, that is a big number. That is a really, really big number. I hadn't really looked at it from that perspective, but I'm glad you guys are counting.
Well, it's very easy to run that report in Smartling. So thankfully I wasn't sitting there with a calculator, trying to add it up. But one of the ways that you were able to achieve this, and this is something that you and I have talked a lot about, is not just the translation service that we offer, but also the technology that we offer. How
Absolutely.
did you think about scaling at the very beginning to make sure that this would be a very hands-off approach from a developer perspective?
Yeah, so lack of scale was not even an option for us. Part of the reason that we were a little squeamish about translation was because we knew that sort of once you get started, it's very hard to stop. You can't just stop delivering content in that local language for a customer. It's really important. And that meant we had to find a solution that scaled. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, part of the reason we were getting concerned with our first vendor was around lack of technology, lack of integration, lack of options that would allow this to just work. We spent a lot of time up front making sure that this could be fully automated, meaning that when we commit code to our system, it pushes up to Smartling. When translations come back, they also get pulled right down into our system. Same thing with our knowledge base. Same thing really with all of it, with our marketing GDN. The only one that I'll say there's a little bit more manual effort on are the drag and drop documents. So if we want to have, a flyer translated, we'll drop that into the system and then the process takes off from there. But, this system is as automated as it possibly can be. And that's what we needed.
Yeah, I think that's super exciting to us. And of course, you're leveraging different parts of our technology, from the global delivery network, which is the translation proxy, to the API, which has hundreds of endpoints against which your team can deliver, configure against, and then the Zendesk integration for your help center content. So this is a really cool and multifaceted automation program that you're building.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So you were talking a little bit earlier about your language pre-flight, which I think is a very cool term. I've actually never heard it phrased that way, and I might swipe that from you.
You're welcome to. I will tell you, I actually swiped it from our last vendor.
Okay. All right. Well, sometimes it happens that way. What is a language pre-flight? And tell us a little bit about what you do to make that a success.
Yeah. So a language pre-flight, as I understand it, is really it's essentially getting all the pieces in place before you hit the go button. For us, that meant a few things. First and foremost, it's what you have on the screen here. It's a glossary. Every company, no matter who you are, has certain terms that are, I'll call them, specific and unique to you. Brand names you don't want translated, words that are used in a certain context, things that are not common. So I'll just zoom in here on an example, DICOM. DICOM is an interoperable imaging protocol that we talk a lot about in our translations, something we don't want translated. Probably can't see it here. DHL, one of our vendors that we use in Europe and Australia to get our devices around the world, probably should have also filled in a definition there. But if we clicked into the edit button there, I'm sure it would say do not translate. So, this is telling our translators exactly how we want them to handle the words. The second thing that we use is a style guide. Butterfly has done a really good job, I would say, marketing ourselves as a modern, forward-thinking tech brand above and beyond everything else. And that meant that when we talked about our style guide, we wanted an active tone. We wanted not super formal tone. And that's something that the translators are reminded of literally every time they go into the tool to begin translation. The third thing, and probably the most exhausting part of our pre-flight, was actually context. But I would argue that it's also the most important. So, I'm not a very good linguist myself, but if we take a really simple sentence like, I don't know, it's the sky is really dark. That can probably be interpreted a bunch of ways. Is it dark at night? Is it cloudy? And seeing the context, seeing a book in a picture book with the sky is really dark and then seeing it be nighttime is going to possibly impact those translations. And so what we had to do, what we chose to do to ensure that we had the highest quality translations, we actually took screenshots of all of the strings in our app and our desktop web. Smartling has some software that helps with this, helped us capture that information really, really quickly. But actually, when the translators are going and they are translating, they can actually see what that string looks like in context and gives them, the best possible shot at getting that translation perfectly right. And that, is a little time consuming for us, but it was 100% worth it, and it made all the difference. And we were also looking with our engineering team. We could have also automated that process. Given our timeline, we ran out of time there, but it was totally worth it. It reduced the number of questions and concerns and things from the translator probably tenfold. So highly recommended to anybody to make sure you use context.
For sure. And we're going to show you what context looks like in a little bit. But going back to this glossary for a moment, I was scrolling through it the other day. There are a lot of terms. How did you go about creating it in the first place? And how do you go about keeping it updated on a regular basis today?
Yeah, it's a great question. How did we go about it? It started as, largely a brain dump of myself. Once the strings were pulled into Smartling, it then gave me a pretty good sense of what was going on in the app. I think it's pretty funny actually seeing all of the strings pulled into Smartling, because you don't think of it that way. You think of it as, okay, this is the login page. But once you start seeing all the different words there, that the lens that I was told to look at it through was, what are the words that are going to trip people up? What are the phrases that are unique to Butterfly? And we just started there. And it's a living, breathing document. There'll also be times that the translators catch something that I don't, and they come to us and they say, hey, what does this mean? And rather than getting caught on that word again, I'm going to come in here and literally add it to the glossary so that we just don't have to deal with it anymore. I think a good example, I think, you can see here, I updated some of these words, as early as March. We have, some exciting product launches coming up that we've been translating content for. And, I was in here a couple of weeks ago adding those new words in as well.
Yeah. And if we just double click on what a glossary term looks like once you go to edit it, there's opportunity to add ample information. And what I thought was really cool is that, especially because your content is highly scientific and requires accurate translation, that was like a showstopper of yours for considering different vendors. You have the opportunity to add a lot of detail about each of your glossary terms in the product in Smartling.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess one thing that we'll show, and if we jump into the live demo, we could even pull up a string in the cat tool. You can access each of these glossary terms from the cat tool. So as the translator is working, they can actually pull up all of this information, and it's actually presented to them. The terms are underlined, which is super cool. And then you also mentioned, Brandon, that some of your content isn't translated. So it's a simple checkbox in the glossary configurator, but how often are you using this tool?
I think it really depends. So brand names, absolutely. Proper nouns, absolutely. Custom phrases for our marketing that don't translate well. Ultrasound on a chip, ultrasound on chip. Those are pretty unique to Butterfly. And doesn't really make sense to translate. So that's sort of the lens we're looking through when we think about using the do not translate button.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's see what it actually looks like in the cat tool. You mentioned earlier, visual context is something that's really important to you. How do you think this impacts the ability for your translations to be done correctly? And how do you work with our language services team to ensure that the translators are leveraging this to the best of their ability?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like I mentioned, we did something pretty manual for our app, but it paid off with huge dividends. When we do videos, Smartling actually requires context for those, and I think that's incredibly important. There's also some integrations like the GDN that, because Smartling is serving that content, that context is totally live. I can literally change the string and see it get modified on the screen. I can know if it's going to not wrap properly. I can see it all real time. And I think just that ability reduces so much work from our end, having to go and, check all of this stuff ourselves.
Yeah. And I actually, this is a cool example that we pulled here, because ultrasound on chip, this is the do not translate term. And you can see here that it's underlined as a glossary term. So if the translator hovers over this while they're in the cat tool, it would actually clearly say do not translate. And you can see in the target, it wasn't translated.
Absolutely.
So I guess the last slide that we'll show for a moment is that even the videos are translated with context, which is
Absolutely.
super cool.
Absolutely.
And have you actually seen how this works? Like, have you logged in to look at the cat tool in? Yeah. It's super cool because the tool automatically will play the clip that the translator is working on. So it'll loop like the first 3 seconds over and over and over until the translator moves to the next string. And then Smartling will automatically advance the video and start looping the video for the content where the next string lives.
100%. It's very, very, very intuitive.
Yeah, it's super cool. All right, Brandon. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. It would be awesome to see what it is like for you, sort of a day in the life of Brandon in Smartling. And maybe you
Sure.
could walk us through a little bit too of like, how do you engage with the language services team? Because I think a lot of people are curious to hear about how you work specifically with Tessa and how you make sure that the translation quality and the price and the invoicing, all of that stuff is done in a way that's convenient for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a day in the life. This is usually, you can see this is, my fourth tab. This is actually my Chrome browser that I'm in all day. I have my email. I have our Asana tool, which is our project management tool. I have my calendar, and I have Smartling. And these are the four tabs that are always open. And my day really starts. I log in here. There's a couple of projects that are very active. Those happen to be Butterfly Cloud. This is our desktop app. There's no new content here. We have a job in progress. You can see this job is almost complete. The other one I look at is our Android app. Nothing new there. We finished it all yesterday. And then also our iOS app. Looks like 2 strings were pushed up overnight. I held these today because I thought we may be doing some sort of demo here. So usually what I do is I go in and I look at the strings. I will note that I think Smartling laughs at me that I haven't just turned on automation here. So when new strings come, they get authorized. And I think for larger companies doing higher volume, it's almost a must to do that. For me, my whole goal here is get as few emails from the translators as possible. So I like to actually scroll through and look at the strings really quickly. I'll usually, just look at the source strings only, and I'll see, okay, well, this is actually one that could cause a little bit of trouble. Smartling has ingested the variables, means our engineers at Butterfly have handled this properly. You can see that these are obviously numbers. We can see that if I zoom in here, they've put some notes in the code that Smartling has also ingested that's saying that, this is an author plus their title. So that's what these variables are going to fill in. That's really important information for the translators. At this point, I'm just now going to select all the strings. Let's say I'll create a new job. I usually just name them more strings, put the date on it. And then I'll usually say, okay, it's 2 words. Let's have it due tomorrow. And Adrian, I don't know what the official Smartling answer is, but I typically find if it's under 500 words, that's typically going to be done next day. I've even heard that I think the language services team has told me they can do up to 1,000 or something like that. So,
Yeah.
when I know it's a relatively small job, setting that next day is very comfortable for us.
Totally. And our project managers just get a notification now that you've authorized a job, and they're going to assign it to our linguists that are assigned to your account immediately. In fact, the translators also get a notification, and they're going to project manage it to hit the deadline. And if they don't, what they do is they'll actually reach out to you and say, hey, Brandon, 2 words in a day isn't possible. They would definitely not say that. But let's say it was 3,000 words that you tried to do. They might come to you and say, hey, how do we prioritize some things, or how critical is this? We'll do our best to deliver, but it is a human process at the end of the day.
Yep. And I would say that for the 1,000,000 words we've translated, I don't think they've ever missed a deadline. They've certainly asked a couple of questions, especially in the beginning when we were really pushing. I don't think they missed a single deadline. So it's very impressive. Again, because you can interact with the translators, and I'll show that in a minute. They've come to us and they've said, submitting it this way because of the deadline. If you have any questions, let us know. Happy to fix. So here I've now created a job. You can see that it's 12 languages with 2 words. That's 24 words. Again, because of the technology platform, Smartling has leveraged that translation memory. Looks like the system has actually seen these words already, because it's saying here that it's going to be a total cost of 0, and the weighted words are also 0, meaning that there's nothing to translate. So when I push authorize now, it should show me that this job is already completed. And that's because it's leveraging those words from the translation memory. So if I just hit authorize, I'm going to use the default workflow for this language, and I'm going to push confirm. Let me go back here, and we should see that this job, I guess it hasn't completed yet. Usually takes a minute or two. There it goes. And now you can see that job has been completed. And now the next time our team pulls code down to our system, those strings will be filled in with the right information. The other thing in terms of talking about how I work with the language services team, I think the good news for me is I really don't very much. Now that we're off and running, there's not a lot to deal with. But I did wake up to an issue this morning, just so people know that this is not a simulation. You can see it's the bottom email in my inbox here. This is quite literally what I woke up to this morning. I think I woke up at about 5:30, and it was an issue raised by the translators, direct communication with them. When I come into Smartling here, I can see that it looks like we may have sent up a plural incorrectly from our code. One of the questions that I saw in the chat just a moment ago was, what's one of the issues that we actually do face with our translations? I would say it is handling plurals. And it's very, very infrequent. I would say that it's, I don't know, once every 2 months, one of these comes up. It just happened to have come in today. So I will be contacting the language services team later when I get around to it. But typically some of these were supposed to be parsed. I think we left out a couple of delineators on our end. So you can see here the translators have said, does this need translating? The Spanish translators have come in, the Polish translators. I responded that I was looking into this with the engineering team, and I'll respond shortly. Portuguese jumped on, and I will get back to them, sometime today, or the language services team will likely respond. But this level of sort of real-time engagement is something we absolutely need. Could you imagine if I was now waiting for an email from Tessa or somebody like that, to say, hey, Brandon, the translators raised this. What do you think about this? We're talking about extending that translation time for, let's call it 24 hours and just a whole lot of annoyance.
For sure.
So that's largely my workflow. I'm happy I can show here, our knowledge base. We use the Zendesk integration. When I go into that here, it's actually showing me stuff directly from Zendesk. It's showing me what jobs are completed, what jobs we've decided not to translate, in totally real time. And again, I think, we talked a little bit about workflows. You can see all the different projects we have here. We have the legal workflow. This is one we don't use a lot, but when we do need a contract translated, this has a special workflow set up that's going to route that to legal translators, or the regulatory document one. I think we have a special workflow there where it actually goes through a 3-step translation because those documents are so important. So that's the level of customization we have.
That's so cool. And maybe actually, Brandon, you could pull up your workflows configurator and we can talk through that. But while you find that, we got a question from James. So you use linguists at Smartling to do the translation work rather than using a third-party agency to come in and make the changes in Smartling. That's exactly what Brandon's doing. Brandon is one of our customers. The vast majority of our customers use Smartling's language services offering. And they do that because 100% of our translators are using Smartling's tool every single day. They're fully trained on how to use the tool. They know how to communicate with our customers seamlessly. And it's a very efficient process for managing language translation. Brandon doesn't have to think about multiple agencies, multiple vendors. He goes to Smartling. He's got a couple of point people who he can speak with, and then it's turnkey. But Brandon, I mean, do you feel that's been what your experience is like with Smartling? What would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have certainly, or had certainly many, many months ago, discussed, should we have a third party do this? We even spoke with a couple of third parties that can integrate with Smartling. Truthfully, we didn't see the value in it. And I'll be honest, I don't know if there's more specific content than ours, although I would challenge that idea because ours is healthcare content. I just can't imagine any content that is so niche and specific that you would need a third party to come in. These translators are native speaking. It's just honestly something we couldn't quite convince ourselves of why we needed that complexity. And Smartling, again, they proved it to us that they would be able to handle this. So I know that they're out there. I don't fully understand what hole they serve, but certainly not something that we've ever gone down.
Yeah. And look, a lot of, there are customers of ours that do use a third party, and that is okay. But there are some substantial benefits to working with Smartling's translation service. I mentioned one of them being that the translators know how to use the tool. We find people who are the right person for your content. And I think Brandon exemplified that perfectly earlier, saying we have regulatory translators, legal translators, medical translators. So there's a really cool and diverse amount of content that you're translating that you've focused on with us. But here, this is really cool because now we're actually showing you the workflows that we set up with you, Brandon.
Yeah, you watched me fumble around for a minute to try to find this screen.
Yeah, but this is showing you e-commerce. There's some pre-published workflows, legal docs, cross-locale adaptation. Do you want to walk us through what that is?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to even speak with this, but
I can help you
speak about this. But again, to be as local as humanly possible, English, has many variations, many dialects. One of the things that our team felt very strongly about was making sure that in the UK and Australia, we were adopting to their dialect of English, I'll call it. Smartling offers a couple of things, and I may butcher the words here. One is really a full translation, and that's what we use if we're going English to French or English to Italian. They also have something called cross-locale adaptation. And that's really, okay, looking at those English words and where there's a change required, making that change. We also use that, I believe, on French Canadian. So we take our French for France translation. There's a few changes that are required for French Canadian, and that team just adapts it from there. And Adrian, maybe you can speak to it better than I can, but I believe there's small price benefits to do that as well.
Major price benefits. Specifically, what happens is I think a better example is like Spanish. Let's say you were trying to target two markets. One of them is Spain, one of them is Mexico, but you know that your business opportunity in Spain is much greater than it is in Mexico. You would configure a workflow so that your English content gets translated into Spanish for Spain. And then you would adapt that content for Mexico by taking all of the content you just translated for Spain, and then it would automatically populate for Spanish Mexico with the ability for a linguist to go in there and make changes to only the content that actually has to be edited. So instead of retranslating 100% of the content, you might be editing 3.5% of the content. And that's exactly how much money you save in that process.
Yep.
But, this is cool. And a couple other things that I just point out that we're looking at this, some of these workflows haven't been touched in a year. Some of them have been updated earlier this year, but the linguists that we assign to our customers' accounts don't change. We assign a team of people who work on your content, and they get to know your content over time. In fact, we're going to show you the results of Brandon's translation program soon, and it will actually speak to how well our translators have been able to learn about your content and turn around content even faster.
Perfect. Should I stop sharing?
I think the one last thing that we should point out, in the top right corner, you have that flag with the issue.
Yes.
I think that's such an important thing. I know you showed us this earlier, but there's something here. Let's see if we click on the issue. Does it deep dive? Yeah. Okay. So what's really cool here, and we looked at this earlier, is that this issue, you could actually see the person, the actual translator who opens this issue. It's not just some ghost who is, working on your content. You actually will know the person who you're working with to translate your content. A lot of our customers have hopped on Zoom calls with our translators to talk about things before in the, what did you call it? The pre-flight.
Yeah.
We have pre-flight calls. We have check-in calls if there are escalations. translations aren't going well. It happens. We put our translators on the phone with our customers so that the problems can be resolved in a timely fashion. It's something that we're very open about. Does that transparency add any value to you as a customer, Brandon?
100%. I can say we have not, thankfully, had any issues that we've had to get on the phone with anybody. But absolutely, I think even just being able to address them by name, I think really helps. I think they know that we're friendly. We know that they're friendly. I think it's hugely valuable.
Yeah. There's one other question from the group, from Catherine. Can you name one problem that still prevails in regards to the quality of your content, assuming the quality of your translation?
Yeah, I think I typed back a response, but maybe it wasn't. I can elaborate on a little bit. I would say plurals, which is actually what this issue is. It's really, I believe, on our end, and I believe it's just the way that the strings get handled in the code. Most of these none of them actually get out to our end customers, but it does cause us a little bit of having to mess around with the strings a little bit. In terms of quality, I don't believe there are any quality issues. Our customers are pretty vocal, again, because they're medical professionals. I could say that probably in my year plus of looking at this, I think I've gotten one thing which said in Swedish, a female was referred to as a female animal instead of a female human. And there was still some question about whether that translation was actually wrong. So that is the level of issues that we have, and it's very, very low.
Yeah.
And I think when this was actually a couple of weeks ago, when I emailed the Smartling team, they actually came back in about an hour with a whole explanation of why the translation was actually correct.
Well, that's an interesting example, but I also think that the results that you've had is in large part due to the level of effort that you and your team have put into the pre-flight content, the glossaries, style guides. Actually, why don't you pull up your style guide
Sure.
so we can show people how in-depth that product is. But all of those tools are really important. And for those of you who may not be aware, Smartling can actually create your glossary and your style guides for you. So if you don't have the in-house resources or the time to do it, we will interview you. We'll do a very in-depth analysis of all your content, and we will actually produce a very comprehensive style guide and a glossary that we then import into Smartling for your translators to have access to.
Perfect. So here's our style guide. It's not terribly complex. We talk about what the subject should be, how colloquial expression should be handled, active voice, can they abbreviate? I'm sure that there are more complex style guides. This one probably hasn't been updated, very recently for us. But again, because we use the same translators, because they know us, the number of questions that we get asked, they're familiar with our content at this point.
Yeah, we did a webinar 2 weeks ago with Jessica over at Yext, and if you all are interested in seeing how she handles style guides, definitely jump on over to that webinar. Maybe Katie, you can drop a link in the chat, because they built the most comprehensive style guide I've ever seen, and they do it for each language. So like her Japanese style guide is like 7 or 8 Google Doc pages. It's like really comprehensive.
Wow.
So that's a great resource, if you want to learn about how to make a very in-depth style guide.
I should probably go read that one myself.
Yeah, well, Katie will drop a link. Okay, we've got 2 more questions, and I might take the screen share back, Brandon.
Sure.
This one is from Roxy. Is adaptation for translating from Spanish Spain to Spanish Mexico an automated feature in Smartling? Maybe I'll handle that one, Brandon.
Sure.
It is an automated feature. What we do is we work with our customers to configure that in the workflow, and then the content's automatically copied over to the target for the second language or third, fourth, fifth, sixth language that you're trying to provide cross-locale adaptation to. And then we have human translators who go in and do the touch-up work. Katie, if you hop over to help.smartling.com and search for adaptation, there's a help article there, and we could drop it in for Roxy to take a look at. Catherine asked, do you have a language-specific style guide? For example, do you have one for French and for Spanish?
We don't. It was honestly not even something I had thought about, but it has not been a problem for us. However, we do have certain glossary terms defined for certain languages. So in the glossary, you're able to say, this is a term that we only want dealt with this way for this language. And we have some of those.
Cool. And does your product change by market, or it's the same product in every market?
It's a great question. It is largely the same product. There are some features because of regulatory controls that are on or off by market, and that is something that Sergio has helped us with from our solution architecture perspective with our GDN. So in terms of what content gets served where on our website, that's something that Smartling has also helped us with.
Yep. Awesome. Another question that we might want to tag team here is, how do you control translators' utilization of style guides and glossaries, things like that?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways that it happens. First way, as I mentioned, the style guide literally gets flashed when the translator goes into the CAT tool. So that's sort of step one. It's always sort of there and ready for you. Second thing is, Adrian, I can try to pull up quickly the CAT tool, or you can, but the CAT tool has a whole bunch of helpful tips around it. Things like words that are in your glossary, things like helpful hints from your style guide. All of that is right there in front of the translator. So as much as this platform is useful for me, I'm sure there's a whole team at Smartling working on the actual translation experience, making sure that it's in your face. Other things, and again, I don't know if this is totally with the style guide, but things like if an extra space is added or a colon is used and it's not supposed to be used, the system will actually flag that to you in the CAT tool. I guess the last thing is, the workflows that you set up yourself, also make sure that this is happening. If there's a translation and edit step, somebody's translating based on that style guide, and then somebody's going to edit also to the style guide. So there's some aspect of multiple sets of eyes on this too that helps control it.
Yeah. With your permission, I'm going to share my screen, which has your instance. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other tool that we have, and I'm just finishing pulling this up, we have automated quality checks, and that's essentially what you were referring to. They do render in the CAT tool as well. But let's just find, here it is. Okay. Here's an example, Catherine. You had asked, how do we ensure a glossary term is being followed? Brandon can turn this on to be enabled. And then Smartling is going to automatically search for target translations that are matching or not matching the desired glossary term and translation that Brandon's entered into the tool. And you can configure it to however you'd like. There are low severity, which is it'll just put up a warning, all the way up to high severity, which would actually not allow the translator to submit the translation if the glossary isn't complied with. And, there are reasons for people using it or not using it. And you could see some of these are turned on and some of them are not turned on. But it's simple to implement. And then you have an automated tool that actually does all of the compliance for you. Okay, I think
the other question that I saw in here, oh, I'm sorry, was about if they can edit the glossary or not. Adrian, you may be best to answer. I don't believe that they can, because I think the goal is to not have the translators change our intent. So typically I will then respond if a translator opens an issue and says, I didn't see this term in the glossary. I'll typically quickly go in and add that.
Yeah, I believe it is possible for the translator to update a glossary term, but only if certain permissions are set up, and they are only set up if the customer asks for it to be. So it is possible. Okay, and we have a couple more questions, but you know what? Before we answer these questions, I think we should show some results because I don't want this to be lost. These are really cool results. So tell us about like the first 10 days of using Smartling.
First 10 days of using Smartling were a bit of a whirlwind. They were, tons of issues opened, and I call them issues, but they're really just questions. Really just trying to get familiar with our content, fixing typos and stuff that we didn't even notice. It was certainly a crazy couple of days. As you can see, 70,000 words got us through our apps, got us through our web experience, got us through our marketing site. It was chaos, but everyone nailed it, and it was awesome.
Yeah, 70,000 words in 10 days is nothing. It's something to be quite proud of. It's a lot of language, a lot of words across a lot of languages. But let's also talk a little bit about how our team has been able to get content back to you faster. This is a really cool outcome because we were talking earlier about the importance of having translators who are continuously working on your account. What does this result mean to you to get translations back? A year ago, it took 10 hours on average per string, and now it takes like 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, as a product person, everything that I do is about doing it quickly and thoroughly, and making sure that we're making the biggest impact. So, thankfully, I'm not in a position oftentimes that I need that string that hour, but in the cases where we do, and they do come up quite often, having those come back and knowing that they're going to be quality means everything. It's out of the many, many things that I deal with on a daily or weekly or hourly basis. I really don't think very much about translations because I know that the system is working.
Yeah. And what is the ultimate result of all of this? What did you ultimately achieve?
Yeah. So last year, about a year ago, almost exactly, we launched, in Europe and Australia. We launched 13 markets. It took us about 6 months to get through all of our regulatory and privacy work, our logistics work. And it impacted, our company in terms of reach and market share and revenue, in unbelievable and huge ways, contributing a large portion to our bottom line, both last year and this year. So we could not legally do it without Smartling.
I couldn't legally do it is true. But it's also important because, as you mentioned earlier, you're able to deliver like some pretty awesome product to field physicians and people in need of getting these scans. So it's an awesome product fit.
Absolutely.
All right, we've got a couple more questions, and we've basically got through all of our slides. So if you have more questions, feel free to ask them. We're here for you. Here's another one for you, Brandon. Brandon, how do you motivate and inspire other localization managers to be so communicative and supportive and organized when it comes to context and questions? I suppose it's context about, visual context, and I guess questions about translation and localizations.
It is a really good question. I'll be very honest in my answer. I did not have an option. We were under the gun to get this done and get it done quickly, that I basically went to Smartling and said, what is the absolute quickest and easiest and best way that I can make sure that we have all, that these come back clean? And they came back and said context. I hope that nobody else is under the gun like we were on this one, but regardless, I think that, that is really critical to getting this done. I used my probably very bad example before, but you can imagine how sentences could come out if you don't have the proper context.
Yeah. That's awesome. The only thing I'd add to that is if you haven't yet listened to the Loke Show, we've had 19 episodes now featuring amazing localization managers and product managers. And we actually talk about that very question basically on every episode. So there's a lot to learn from other localization managers there. Some people have talked about how they work closely with the finance team to show ROI. Others have spoken about how, I interviewed someone today and she was talking about how the entire company now prioritizes localization in everything they do. Her team has 7 people who are localization managers and then 3 or 4 who are localization engineers. So she works with both developers and project managers who help to articulate what's happening around the business. Another question, Brandon.
Sure.
How do you manage marketing content and translation memory since there's a lot of transcreation involved?
Can you say more about the transcreation part?
Sure. Well, I can elaborate on that. And it may not be so applicable to your brand, but transcreation is the process of adapting the content, not just the translation, but for the meaning in the market. Typically it's used for very high level content that is brand oriented. So for example, if you were putting out an advertisement for Butterfly Network and the ad had the copy had a pun in it, that makes sense to you and me because we sit here in New York.
Right.
But if you brought it to London, let's say it said Subway, like the transcreation for Subway would be tube or underground in London.
Right.
So how do you manage transcreation at Butterfly?
Yeah, so I think it's really a combination of things, and I love the example of Subway versus tube. I think it all starts sort of, if we're talking about marketing content, I'll talk about a brochure. This doesn't directly get at the transcreation question, but we use tools to develop our content that are that have localization in mind. So things like Sketch, things like InDesign, things like Illustrator, and I know that Smartling has integrations with all of these things. So first thing we do is we make sure that, there's enough room that words are going to wrap properly. And Smartling allows us to actually both import and export content back to that document. So we can even see things like pseudo translations and, what is a word that's twice as long going to do to our beautiful design? So that's sort of step one. Step two, style guide. I think you just nailed it. Subway versus tube versus underground. Those are things that are going to be in our style guide, in our glossary. The third thing is then going to be style guide, and you saw ours is not terribly sophisticated, but it has served its purposes. I think one of the things that we do say in there is if there is something for a local dialect or jurisdiction, please use that. We also sometimes will get questions. Translators are really, really good. I think one example there is on our e-commerce store. Sometimes the engineers will forget to put up a price as a variable, and the price will come up and it will say $900, and the translator will come back and they'll say, I've converted this to euros. Is this the right price? And they're really paying attention because they have to. Their job is to make sure that this content is as clean as humanly possible. And so I don't think there's one straight answer that says, how do we localize for each location? It's a hodgepodge or a conglomeration of multiple systems all working together.
Yeah. And Anna, it's a great question. Another thing that Brandon, you can do and customers can do is actually configure different TMs based on the content type. And then you can either leverage all of them or you can isolate certain ones. So if you have a transcreation project, you can isolate your strings to a specific TM, which is really cool. Brandon, this was awesome.
Yes, this was great.
We're at time. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. And thanks to everybody for all the great questions here.
Of course. I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me.
Good luck with your product launch this evening. We'll be standing by.
All right. We'll talk with you all soon. Thank you again.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.